Welcome to Southeastern 14 presented by Stakes. I'm Chris Lee. He's Blake Lovell. We continue our preview series of SEC basketball teams for the upcoming season, and we are hitting every one. Today we get to the Georgia Bulldogs, who had a horrendous season in which Georgia went 1-17 in the SEC. That lone win coming against an erratic Alabama team. Georgia fires Tom Crean, brings Mike White over from Florida, and we get a big reset, but the Bulldogs bring back their top two players from a year ago. So there's a little bit of a bright spot at the end of the tunnel for the Bulldogs, perhaps entering this season, Blake?
Perhaps. I'm Ron Burgundy. Yeah, I don't. I mean, look, the thing is, right? Anytime you have that discussion, I think it's, and don't get me wrong, I think Kario, Oquendo, and Braelen Bridges are good players, but I still think you certainly have to put it in the context of what that team achieved last season, and obviously that was much bigger than just those two guys. So, I think that will be something that a lot of people will probably point out with Georgia is just that they are two really good players, and I think at their best, they're two all SEC type players. But of course, it's just how much of that just was everything else, and I think that's probably was more the case last year than it was their individual play. But it is something where I think Georgia will be picked near the bottom of the SEC based on that. Is you do have two high producing guys, but how do they do it in the context of kind of what this team is now, right? Because they've got basically a big new group around them now, and just kind of seeing what they're able to do. But I'll just say this: I think if you're a Georgia fan and you care about basketball, I think you should be more optimistic. I think about what Mike White can do there. I don't think you should compare it to what Mike White did at Florida, because guess what? If he does anywhere close to what he did at Florida, you'll be just fine. Because I just think that was, we always talked about it, was a really hard job stepping in to try to fill in the shoes of Billy Donovan. No one was going to succeed at that outside of a select few, I think. And now that pressure's off. He's able to kind of come in and try to rebuild a program that bottomed out last year. So even if it doesn't show this year, I think they're at least in a good spot moving forward.
Georgia's always intrigued me from a basketball standpoint. I know historically it's one of the bottom 3 or 4 jobs in the league, and maybe that's what Georgia is now, but great recruiting base in that area. You're proximate to Atlanta. It has always just befuddled me, and I know some of it's probably priorities. Football is the tail that wags the entire athletic department at Georgia. What do you think of this, though? I mean, it does seem like there's potential there given the recruiting, but it's never panned out. How do you reconcile those contradictions?
Yeah, I mean it's at some point I think you just kind of want to see it, right? I think that's
Right.
what it comes down to. We can point out the recruiting base and location and resources of just being an SEC school. But at some point, it's a matter of what do you get done, and I think that that's just a program that's historically, really struggled to do that. I wouldn't say it's one of the, not even close to one of the programs with the best tradition in the SEC in basketball. Football, obviously a different story, but um, you could argue it's the best recruiting. I think it is the best recruiting base in the SEC. But we've always talked about that. I think Mike White will do well recruiting there. But you also have the Bruce Pearls and everybody else who's basically made that part of the the Southeast their own at this point, and been able to go in and get the top players and all that there. So I think there are a couple selling points to this Georgia job and ability to win, but I don't I don't think this has not historically been a program that has the upside of a lot of its counterparts. Now, you could have said the same about some of the other programs perhaps that struggled until they found the right guy. And it's just a matter of, is Mike White the right guy um, to push them to where they need to go? I still think there are going to be some challenges in place in terms of, I think just being able to compete with the top part of the SEC now and the rest of the coaching roster. You can be a good coach in this league, as we've said before, right? You can be a good coach and you can still finish near the bottom of the league because it's just what you have around you. So I think the potential is there for Georgia to continue, to move forward in basketball, but it's more challenging than I think some people will be willing to admit, in terms of kind of where that program has gotten to.
Well, one surprise. I mean, I would have probably bet the house that Kario Oquendo would have transferred to a much bigger program. Hats off to Mike White for keeping him. Oquendo last year averaged 28.8 points a game, minutes a game, 15.2 points a game, 4.3 assists. The big knock on Oquendo was turnovers. He was 0.3 assists to turnovers, which is really not good no matter where you play. Shot 45% from the field, 27 from three, 71 from the line. So maybe not the most efficient guy, but he didn't have a lot of help either.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are what they are. He's got to be more efficient. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But like you said, a large product of that was just shooting as much as, I mean, what he probably shot almost 30% of their shots, be my guess. Somewhere in there, 30 to 35%, just because he had to. And, isn't it somewhat similar? It's not the same, but it's somewhat similar to the Severe Wheeler conversation we had a couple years ago, in that, Wheeler's numbers were not great from an efficient standpoint either, but he was really all they had. And I think when you look at kind of what Oquendo can do, if you just watch his game, I said last year, kind of as he started to put up some of those games, that if you just watch his game, I think it's easy to see there's a lot there. And it's just honing in some of those efficiency numbers. And I think, certainly this is going to be a team too. I guess we're just going to throw this gauntlet down to everybody on the roster. Like, we know how Mike White operates. These guys got to play defense, because that's how he had some of his success at Florida. Is, I don't want to say it, and could come off the wrong way, but it's like, I'm not saying Mike White didn't have any good offensive teams there, but his teams were mostly built around good, strong defense. And, I think that's kind of something that you look at here with, Oquendo and all these guys on the roster. They're going to have to prove themselves as defenders, I think. But the scoring is going to have to be there for this team to succeed. I don't think there's any doubt about that, because when you look at the rest of the roster, you will get some scoring from different places, but I don't think you have another, volume scorer like this, except for maybe, a Terry Roberts. And again, I'm not knocking Bridges either. I think he's certainly there too, but I still feel like Oquendo is the guy that makes you go here in terms of what he can do.
Before we talk about the rest of the roster, a shout out to our partners at Stakes. Stakes is the free app where you can make your sports predictions. You can get your predictions on the record and predict anything in the game for free. See how you measure up against fans and influencers. You can flex your wins by broadcasting your takes to our community of sports fans with just a few steps. And you can earn credibility by making your public predictions track record, public winning competitions, and earning NFT trophies for making the perfect call. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Use our invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. What's not to like? Play for free, make your predictions for free, win stuff, have a good time. We love Stakes. They love us. Hope you'll learn to love them too. Best way to find out is go to that app, use that sign-up code, and join in today. Braelen Bridges, Blake, was one of the more underrated players in the league last year. I don't know if underrated was the right word, but certainly maybe undiscovered productive players would be a better way to put it. He averaged almost 13 points a game, 5.5 boards, almost 2 assists. Shot the ball well, 63% from the field? Is that right? 73% from the line. I mean, it's one of those things that on any team, you're going to have a leading scorer, a leading rebounder. I don't care how bad you are. You're going to have guys that put up numbers. And when your team's that bad, it's hard to separate the two. Like, is this a really good player playing on a bad team, or is this part of the problem? I guess we'll find out with Braelen Bridges this next year, and you've seen him make his way. I think Athlon's put him on, or excuse me, Lindy's. Athlon didn't do basketball this year. Lindy's put him, I think, on one of its 3 All-SEC preseason teams. Really good player last year in terms of efficiencies and such.
Yeah, I mean, look, and that's the thing with this team, and I don't think we'll individually get into all the newcomers in depth, but there's a lot of new faces here that are going to have a chance to play. But I think if you're building your roster around what you have coming back, I mean, it's a good place to start. Like even for a team that lost a lot of games, because I think that like you said, there's efficiency there with Bridges, and he's obviously got the size to be able to compete in the SEC, and we've seen him do that already. But just having someone who can score consistently, in the paint, get close to the rim, and you feel pretty confident those percentages are high enough to support the fact that he's probably going to score, if given the opportunity and getting those open looks there. So, I mean, very talented offensive player. I don't think there's any doubt. And I think, again, it kind of goes back to the same thing where, Chris, we got to keep this in mind. That Georgia team last year, the winning, I know the wins are what stood out or the lack of wins, but I mean, they were absolutely brutal on defense, like truly just an atrocious defensive team. 318th nationally in efficiency. But the bigger question was this, right? They finished 355th nationally in 2-point field goal defense.
Ooh,
So teams just scored at will on them inside the arc, and I think that's where someone like Bridges, defensively, they got to clean that up big time. And that's not something I don't think you're going to see on a Mike White team. It's like we said, I mean, Mike White, he'll put whoever needs to be in there to get that number down. So I think these are all things. And again, I'm not saying that Oquendo and Bridges can't be good defensive players. I'm just saying this is a theme that we're going to talk about with everyone, because if you want to know why Georgia was as bad as they were, their defensive numbers tell the story. Like they were just a bad defensive team last year. And that's something, even with some returning players, if that doesn't get any better, which it's got to get better by the fall. I don't think it can get worse. They're not going to have success. So
I'm looking down at the blocks leaders last year, including the guys who are on the team who transferred in. Nobody averaged more than half a block per game.
yeah,
That's not good for your 2-point defense.
well,
And I'm talking about all the guys on the roster this year, including the guys who transferred in. They still do not have a rim protector if you judge that by shot blocking.
well, and that's where again I think Bridges has to become that by default, because he's the biggest guy on the roster, right outside of the kid they've got from Syracuse, I guess. But size wise, he is still the biggest because he's what 6'11", 240. So he has to become that. Like I think he has to become like their anchor on defense in the front court. Like I don't think there's any doubt about it, because again, that is where everything starts. We can talk about every offensive number and every player's offensive numbers there is, but if this team is not significantly better on the defensive side of the floor and these guys don't all buy in defensively, which again, I think they will, because Mike White's that kind of coach that I think will get that out of them. They're not going to make the strides that you would hope for in year one.
Okay. The rest of the surrounding cast that returns, not great. But they do have some
Largely
guys, Jackson
unproven.
Eder.
I think that's the best way. Like
Okay. Well, I mean, haven't been great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying, but I think that's probably like largely unproven in the sense of what they're coming into, like in terms of right. Because if we go down this entire group, I mean, we don't have to mention every name in full detail, but if you look at all the transfers, which they have, how many transfers they have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 6 or 7, um, something like that. Let's just say
Six.
at least 6.
Six
So,
D1, and they're all D1, by the way,
yeah,
including one from in the league and
but
3 from Power 5 schools. Yeah.
and they are guys who, in different, like we said, I think Terry Roberts to me is probably the most. I always hesitate to call anyone a sure thing, but I think he will play, and he will play a lot. I'd be surprised if he doesn't. He's experienced, comes from Bradley, average 15 points a game, 5 rebounds. He and Oquendo have got the connection from playing together in JUCO. First team All Missouri Valley. He'll play defense, so that automatically gives him, I think, a spot. So I think that he'll play. It's the other guys who have put up numbers, whether it's Hill at Longwood, McBride at North Texas, who I think will help them shooting wise, which that's another thing. They need to be able to shoot the ball, because that's something else they didn't do exactly a great job of last year. But that to me is what ties all these new guys together. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but like I think that's just it's just, I don't know. This is the team to me, and we may say this about South Carolina, we do their preview, but it's like if you're asking me the teams that I'm least confident on in terms of what their rotation is going to look like, period, like beyond 1 through maybe 3 or 4, I have no idea who plays how much, like which guys kind of emerge as the guys they have to have on the floor outside of just the guys they have returning.
Yeah, I was going to say, in addition to the transfers, McBride averaged 11.3 and 3 at North Texas. Hill averaged 14.2 and 4.8 at Longwood. Roberts 14.5, 4.9, and 4.1 assists at Bradley. Roberts shot 35% from three, 45% from the field. McBride was a 39% three-point shooter, and Hill was an 80% shooter from the line at Longwood. So there's that. I was going to also say, Jackson Etter very quietly hit 42% of his three-point shots. Jalen Ingram averaged almost 11 points, 6 boards a game, shot 49% from the field, 90 from the line. Jabri Abdur-Rahim averaged almost 7 points, a little over 3 boards in 18 minutes. Didn't shoot it particularly well, but they did have some other guys coming back who have played a good number of minutes a year ago, and that always helps.
Yeah, I mean, Ingram's coming off of what? Torn ACL, 6-year senior. He only played in 9 or 10 games last year, so getting him fully healthy, I think, will be a big key. If they can do that, that will be a significant boost, I think, for them. Abdur Rahim's still there. He's a junior now, 6'8". I think just, him being able to add a little bit more of that consistent scoring would help. Here's what I think. I think again, it's hard to figure out what the rotation is going to look like beyond maybe those top several spots. But like I said, I do think Roberts is going to play. I think Hill will play because of his defensive ability too. He can score, but I'm telling you, man, it's the guys who play defense are going to play for Mike. Like they're going to be out there on the floor, and I think that's where again, I think it's pretty obvious Oquendo and Bridges are going to start. My expectation would be that Roberts and Hill are going to be in there playing off of each other at those guard spots too. So if let's say you start Oquendo, Roberts, and Hill, I think that's a pretty good trio to build on to start the season. Because you've got, again, I think Roberts has proven himself. Hill, I think has the speed, defensively to really help them there. As someone who, again, I said a lot of these guys are largely unproven. I just meant that at the SEC level. We always say that about guys who transfer up. It's just hard to know exactly what to expect. But I think that group of 4 right there. I feel like, I think you're pretty confident in that group of 4. Like I think those are 4 guys that you feel like probably, if you look up right now and say who are going to be our top 4 leading scorers, I think it's probably those 4 guys in some order. But I think beyond that, that's just the thing I don't know is like what does everything look like beyond that? Because again, that's going to come down to the health of Ingram, which again he's coming off a torn ACL. I think Abdur Rahim is a talented player. It's just can they add more production from him? So some wild cards there, but I don't, I'm not trying to be pessimistic about them, but I think it's just hard to know for a team that just was, I know it's a new staff and everything, but man, like that roster and just where things got to, like man, I look back on last season, I'm like, man, how did that even happen? And I think some of that just kind of carries over into the season, even if you've got a new coaching staff and a lot of new players on the floor there.
Well, there were 3 guys on this team that averaged 1 steal or more last year. Those guys were Hill, Oquendo, and Roberts. I'd say that's a pretty good start given Mike White's proclivities towards defense. I would think it's probably those guys and Bridges. My guess, maybe the 4 guys who lead them in minutes, perhaps.
I think those are your locks, just on paper. Like I think they're. That's probably a good bet. I think they're the locks in terms of lineup wise. I feel like I'd be surprised if it's not those 4 in the starting lineup plus someone else. And again, I think that comes down to an Ingram or maybe an Abdur Rahim and those guys kind of mixing and matching perhaps. I feel like that's probably your best bet from if you're talking about opening night and what your expectations are. That would be my prediction on this Georgia team.
Well, I like to look at experience too. Georgia's got And by the way, all these stats, all these guys on the roster played Division I ball last year that we're talking about. They have a recruit, Kyron Lindsay, who was a top 100 recruit, barely. Don't know where he fits in, but they had, what was it, 7 guys play at least 24 minutes and 10 guys play at least 14 minutes a game last year. So, sometimes those are the teams that get a little better. Although I feel like we're in this territory with a lot of teams in the league. You got a lot of teams that brought in transfers, but Georgia's probably a little bit more above average in guys that played double-digit minutes a year ago at this league, and maybe that's a place where Georgia can springboard that, plus a new coach and a fresh start into a better year.
Like I said, I think let's call it what their guard play is gonna. That's the strength of their team, or the guys on the guard position, the guys on the wing. I think are the strength. Beyond that, you've got Bridges and a lot of questions, right? I think that's
Yeah.
And even with that, like we said, I think the interior defense is still a big question, depending on what you get out of the rest of the group and Bridges. I think like you talked about with the block percentage, and we always you can never underestimate the impact that can have not affecting other team shots. Like it's not even about right. It's not even
we could pretty well estimate it last year.
Well, and I was going to say, but I think that's a good gauge, right? You
Yeah.
can't underestimate that aspect of when you don't, when you don't impact other team shots. That will certainly drive your defensive numbers down because it's a higher percentage shot when you're not blocking shots and impacting shots defensively. So that's a big question mark, I think, in terms of how do they stop teams if they get beyond their initial guard group and get to the paint. And I think that's still going to be a question heading into the season. So I'm curious to see how that front court group shakes out beyond Bridges, because they're going to have some they're going to have people in that group step up. Whether that's Anselm there, the Syracuse transfer, or any other guys like that. They're not going to have a choice, right? Like they've got to have guys that step up and be able to help, I think, in that front court. And it's just a matter of, like I said, an Ingram back to 100%. Guys like that, it's going to be significant for their success this season.
Parting thoughts on the Bulldogs?
Yeah, I mean, look, let's just call it what it is. Like, I know we didn't spend a ton of time on Georgia's compared to the other teams, but I think this is one of the more. I don't know what else to say. Like, I think this is a team that is basically, Chris, like they're just hitting reset in every way. Like beyond just a couple guys coming back, like they have to change so much about, it's. I mean, is it fair to say, like, I don't know how you compare this to Vanderbilt several years ago, but Vanderbilt had to hit reset. Like they had to just the program bottomed out. And we said it's not often you see SEC programs just completely bottom out, right? But like Georgia was the next one to do that, like completely bottomed out. It's a team that's only been to the tournament, 3 times in the past 2 decades. Haven't been there in a while. And I don't think they're going to get there this year. But to me, it's like this is where you just start building the pieces moving forward, which is much harder to do in the transfer era, knowing that your roster just turns over a lot year after year. But I still think if you're a Georgia fan and you're trying to get reinvested in the basketball program, it was hard for Mike White, like I said, to step into the role he stepped into at Florida. There's much less pressure here. I think the guy's going to do a good job. I said from the start, people initially looked at that hire and was like, man, what are they, why are they going and hiring a guy that couldn't succeed at Florida? Like I said earlier, if Mike White does at Georgia anywhere close to what he did at Florida, that will be good enough for your starting foundation. And again, I don't think he gets there this year, but I still think that his ability to recruit, and certainly, he'll have to recruit that area to have the long-term success he wants to have. But I think he's built a staff. He's got some good talent on this roster. But I think that something else we talked about, right? Sorry, I know I'm kind of going on a rambling rant here, but think about how they played at Florida. Something else we talked about there. They didn't really, I don't know, right? Like they didn't really play what felt like what got Mike White to that point in terms of they were pretty methodical. Like they weren't really get up and down the floor, all that kind of stuff. But Chris, if you look back at his numbers at Louisiana Tech, this is what we talked about when he got the job. we said, like, oh, Mike White's teams, man, they were, if you look at tempo, they're in the top 50 in tempo, like 3 straight seasons. Every year they're at least in the top 70 in tempo. That didn't happen one time at Florida, not even close,
Wow.
And so it's
And you
just,
can get athletes at Florida.
well, and that's the thing is like for some reason they just seemingly did not have what they needed. They sort of played it there. I mean, there were some of those years we talked about, they were just, I mean, they were going at a snail's pace. But if you look back at that Elite Eight team, it seems like they were getting up and down the floor a little bit more. So I am very curious to see how this team looks in terms of the style and what is the style he tries to implement moving forward. Those are a lot of questions, I think, but they all got to be answered at some point. And yeah, I still think this was a good hire, and I think it'll prove to be, even if the results don't show this season.
Hey, I'm with you. I thought Mike White is Mike White a great coach? No, we can't say that yet. But man, you look at his history and his track record. He has been so solid. Blake, do you know how many years he's been under 500 in his
I know
college coaching career?
it's
And
only,
it's been 11 years.
well, I say he's not had any, right? I mean,
It's only 0, right?
he hadn't come close except for maybe his first year, I'm sure. Yeah, so
he has been at least, I'm sorry, his first year he was 18 and 16. Ever since then, he's been at least 5 games over 500 every year. You mentioned Vanderbilt earlier. I think this is maybe Vanderbilt is relevant in 2 ways. The second of which I thought of earlier, and I'll bring up second. You remember Kevin Stallings at Vandy? And I thought at the time Vanderbilt could do better. A lot of people thought Vanderbilt could do better. A lot of people thought Vanderbilt was sort of a sleeping giant, might have been overdoing it, but a place that could win bigger given the previous success in the city and all those things. Well, Vanderbilt fired Kevin Stallings and has not been good ever since, except for 1 year when Bryce Drew snuck into the NCAA tournament. They fired him 2 years later. Vandy finally got back to the NIT last year. I think there's a little bit of similarity between Stallings and White, perhaps, although Stallings' lows were lower than White's lows. I just think we underrate commodities like consistently winning. Consistent winners become their own enemies, excuse me, after a while. Because they're like, well, we've done this, we've kind of plateaued, and we need to get to another level. And I need to drink water. Okay, so there's that. I see. I just think that Mike White fits the profile of a coach who's very underappreciated. And finally, maybe he's met the kind of situation with calmer expectations. He finds his level, finds some success, and everybody's happy. I hope that happens for him.
Yeah. No.
Number 2, go ahead.
I was going to say the Kevin Stallings, Andy Kennedy, is Mike White the next one in terms of the guys that, look, I'm not saying they're all the same situation, but it's like, you kind of saw after a certain point for Stallings, for Kennedy, it just became, we just want to see a new face, right? And I think for Georgia, that can be a big win because you said something that to me is like, just be solid. Because yes, you can't get to being great until you got to be solid first. You can't be all the way at the bottom. It's much harder to do that. Go all the way to the top just immediately. You just got to get back to being solid. And I think if you're Georgia, given where the program sank to, or I just get back to being like solid. Just get back to being a borderline bubble team, rather than the team that set whatever record they set last year for losses, right? As a power conference team or whatever. So yeah, I mean that's all you're asking for at this point.
Of course, here's the irony: Georgia might have had Mike White light in Mark Fox. I'd forgotten this.
Yeah, I just forgot Fox is kind of that same. Yeah,
between 2012-13 and 2016-17, Georgia never went under 500 in the SEC. Now it was right at 500 a couple of years, and it never got way above 500. Best year was 12-6 in 2013-14. And of course, the SEC was down. That made it easier. They ran Fox off in favor of Tom Crean. We all know how that went because now we're having the Mike White discussion. But that said, back to Vanderbilt, you mentioned that situation where Vanderbilt needed a kind of a clean rebuild. I think this is a harder situation this year than maybe what Jerry Stackhouse developed. No, that team had its confidence killed, but I mean that team had, if I recall, Aaron Neesmith, Saban Lee, and Scottie Pippen, who all went on to play in the NBA. I'm not sure there's an NBA player on this roster. Maybe Oquendo is, maybe Bridges is, but I think that's probably a good comp. But I'm not sure if White's got as many pieces as Stackhouse got when he took that job. Could be wrong, but
yeah, we'll find out.
I mean, we're probably nitpicking at that point.
Yeah, like I said, we'll find out. I don't, if he struggles this year and they win 10 games, are we trying to fire Mike White? I don't think so. I think it's just, you got to understand it's going to take time to rebuild this, and quite frankly, it may not be a 2-year plan. We may be on the 3-year plan here. I know Georgia fans don't want to hear that, but I just think it's going to take a little time. You can't go 6-26 and completely bottom out and feel like you're just going to turn everything around in one season. It's not going to happen.
Well, I feel like the podcast has hit the point of bottoming out, and that we've hit all about there is to hit about the Georgia Bulldogs, unless you've got something else.
That's what we do here. We exhaust every possible angle, and we've done that with every team thus far, minus, I think, 2. We got a couple left. So if you're watching this before the action kicks off on Monday, Georgia will open with Western Carolina. And they got an interesting road game at Wake Forest. That'll tell us a little bit, I think. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. Check out all the other previews we've done. And a lot of stuff in there for SEC basketball fans.
Yeah, we're full tilt on football. Of course, we preview a football game every week. We will be talking a lot of basketball. We got preview videos to come. As you said, we've got prediction videos to come. We'll be all in on basketball too during the week as that starts. Lots going on here at Southeastern 14. Best way to get it, hit that subscribe button, tell a friend. Thanks for watching Southeastern 14 presented by Steaks. We'll see you again soon.